If you're looking for a sourdough beginner's guide that actually makes sense, you found it. My mom always says, just show me what to do and tell me if I'm doing it wrong. If you've never baked a loaf in your life, or if you've baked 100 and they still turn out flat, gummy, or just not quite right, you're in the right place. In this video, I'm gonna walk you through exactly how to make real sourdough bread using just flour, water, and salt, and a simple step-by-step method made for home bakers who are tired of the confusion, the flops, and all of the overcomplicated advice. You'll learn what to do, what to look for, and how to finally get a loaf you're proud to pull out of the oven. Let's bake some really good bread together. To go from flour, water, and salt to a beautiful loaf of sourdough, there are 6 steps. The first step is mixing. This is where we combine our ingredients and create our dough. Next step is the folding part of the process. This is where we create strength in our dough by doing a series of stretching and folding. Now, it sounds complicated or kind of like bread gymnastics, but it's not, and I'm gonna show you exactly how to do it. Step 3 is resting, which is kind of the easiest part of the process, but is actually where most new bakers go wrong and is the cause of many sad, flat, gummy loaves of bread that turn out looking more like pancakes than sourdough. Step 4 is shaping, which is my favorite part of the process, and I'm gonna show you my no-fail, super easy method that will have you shaping dough like a pro, promise. From there, it's on to chilling. The chilling phase is where the dough takes a nice cold rest in the fridge, and we can take advantage of that time and take it easy for a little bit. I like this step a lot. And last up is step 6, baking, the part we've been waiting for, where your kitchen is gonna fill with the smell of freshly baked bread. This is probably your family's favorite part of the entire process too. In this step, you'll score and bake your perfect loaf of sourdough. And to make this even easier, my free beginner's sourdough guide is linked down below. Make sure you grab it because it's got all the info you need and is a great resource for new sourdough bakers. Sourdough is made with just flour, water, and salt, but the star of the show is your sourdough starter. Make sure your starter is active and ready to go. That just means it's risen and has lots of bubbles. We've got our flour, water, salt, and sourdough starter, and that's it for ingredients. It's kind of nice that you can actually pronounce everything that's gonna be in your bread. No chemicals, dough conditioners, or weird stuff here. Now, you don't need any fancy tools to make great bread. Your hands are gonna do most of the work, but a kitchen scale is one of the tools you really do need. This allows you to weigh your ingredients, and accuracy is really important in sourdough, so a scale is your friend. You'll also need a bowl, something sharp to score your bread with. I'm using a bread lom, but a razor blade, a really sharp knife, or even a pair of scissors will work too. And you're also gonna need a Dutch oven to bake your bread in. There are a few other things you'll see me using, like a proofing basket and a bowl scraper. And if you don't have them, that's totally okay. I'll show you something else you can use to replace the proofing basket later that I'm sure you have. These are just nice to have items, but they're not required, so don't let that stop you. All right, let's get to it. Grab your sourdough starter, flour, water, and salt, and we're gonna get to mixing. Now, if you need a fantastic beginner sourdough recipe, mine is in my beginner sourdough guide, which is free and linked down below in the description. Thousands of people have used this recipe and they give it 5-star reviews. It's really good. I designed it so the dough is easier for beginners to work with and the bread is still delicious. So definitely check it out. All right, let's get started with step 1, mixing. I have 500 grams of flour I'm gonna add to my bowl and 350 grams of water. Now, what we're doing right now is called the auto lease. And this is a step that a lot of people skip, but I don't think that new bakers should skip this step because what the auto lease does is it makes your dough easier to handle later on. Now, we're just gonna add our water to our flour. We're gonna mix it up with our hands, and then we're gonna let this sit covered for about 30 minutes. Now, you can see that this is just a very shaggy dough. And you might be thinking, Heather, what is going on? But the autolyse is actually going to start hydrating the flour and it's going to start developing the gluten. And later on, this is going to help to improve the elasticity and extensibility of your dough. Now, what does that mean? It means that it's going to make the dough sort of like a rubber band where we can stretch it out and it'll snap back together. And that is exactly what we want. This is what your dough is going to look like when you have finished the initial mix. It's definitely a shaggy dough, and that's totally normal. Now do your best to get the dough off of your hands, and we're just gonna cover this and let it sit for 30 minutes. Now I'm gonna add in my 100 grams of sourdough starter. I'm just gonna pour that right over the top of my dough. And then I'm gonna sprinkle 10 grams of salt right over the top. Here's my salt. And then I have a little bowl of water here, and I'm just gonna dunk my hand in the water and get it wet. So water is gonna make all things sourdough non-sticky, and this will just make the process a lot easier. So I've got my hand wet, and then I'm gonna incorporate this starter and salt using a technique with a little bit of a pinching motion and then a dimpling technique, kind of like you would do with focaccia bread. So I'm just pinching the dough and dimpling in that salt and sourdough starter. Now, it's a messy job, but that's okay. And it is gonna take some time to get this fully incorporated. So you can see that I'm just pinching and dimpling in this starter and salt, and I'm gonna continue mixing it. Now that we've added our starter to our dough, the process of bulk fermentation has begun. So bulk fermentation begins as soon as you add your starter to your dough. And I'm sure that if you've looked at any sourdough recipes or read any blogs, you've seen mention of the term bulk fermentation. Now, bulk fermentation is what makes sourdough sourdough. Bulk fermentation is when gases are forming in the dough so that it starts rising, and gluten is developing, and we are building flavor in our dough. So without bulk fermentation, we would have really flat, gummy loaves. So bulk fermentation is where all of the sourdough magic starts to happen. Once I'm done with this initial mix, I'm gonna cover my bowl and let this sit for 30 minutes, and then we're gonna start doing our stretch and folds. Okay, I have finished mixing in my sourdough starter and my salt. I gave this dough a really good mix, and now I'm gonna cover it for 30 minutes. Now, pro tip, I am using a disposable shower cap to cover my bowl. It's inexpensive and it works really, really well. But plastic wrap will work just as well. You could even put a plate over your bowl, but you do definitely want to cover it so the dough doesn't dry out. So let's let this sit for 30 minutes and we'll come back. All right, the dough has been resting for 30 minutes, and now we're gonna move on to step 2, which is the folding part of the process. So I'm gonna take my cover off, and once again, I'm gonna reach my hand into my bowl of water and get it wet, because a wet hand will be a non-stick hand for sourdough. And we're gonna start stretch and folds. Now, the purpose of stretch and folds is that they're gonna make your dough stronger, they're gonna make your rise better, and your crumb more beautiful. Now, rise is what happens when we're baking our bread. We wanna have a good tall rise, so we have a nice tall fluffy loaf of sourdough bread, and the crumb is what the interior of your bread looks like. So stretch and folds are going to improve all of those things, and they really help to strengthen the gluten. So you're going to take your wet hand, reach down into your bowl, grab your dough, lift it up, and fold it over itself, okay? Then you're going to turn the bowl a quarter turn and do the same thing. Reach in, grab your dough, pull it up, and fold it over itself. Turn the bowl a quarter turn, pull it up, fold it over, and then one last turn. So we've done this 4 times, and that is considered 1 round of stretch and folds. So this is going to do a lot for our dough with very little effort. It's kind of like if you were making bread with commercial yeast and you were kneading the dough, but this is a very gentle way to do it. And you'll see after we complete 4 rounds of stretch and folds that our dough is really going to transform from being shaggy and weak to smooth and elastic. So I've gone all the way around the bowl, and now I'm just going to organize my dough a little bit by kind of picking it up from the bottom and just setting it back into the bowl, so I have a nice organized round of dough. And this is what our dough looks like right now after 1 round of stretch and folds. So I'm going to cover this and I'm going to let it rest for 30 more minutes, And then I'm gonna come back and do this entire process again. So we're gonna do a total of 4 rounds of stretch and folds with 30 minutes of rest in between each one. Okay, I have just finished my 4th and final round of stretch and folds. I'm just organizing my dough in the bowl, and I want you to see how silky and smooth and strong this dough is after 4 rounds of stretch and folds. It really has transformed from that shaggy mess into a beautiful dough. This is what it looks like. And now we're going to be moving on to the next step, step 3, which is the resting part of the process. Now, I'm going to cover my dough. I'm going to leave it on the counter covered, and it's going to continue bulk fermenting. And what I'm going to look for when I know that this dough is done bulk fermenting is that I want the dough to have risen significantly, almost doubled in size. I want it to feel light and airy like a giant fluffy marshmallow, and I'd like to see some bubbles around the surface and the sides of the dough. It should also be pulling away slightly from the bowl. That's how I'll know that bulk fermentation is done. So for me, from the time that I added my sourdough starter to this dough, because that's when bulk fermentation began, it's probably going to be a total of anywhere between 4 to 6 hours. Now, that can really vary, so don't look at the clock. Instead, look at your dough to make sure that your bulk fermentation is done. So for now, I'm just going to let this sit and go about my day. Okay, we're ready to move on to the shaping step, which is step 4. This means that we've decided our dough is done resting. The bulk fermentation is done. Now, if you look at my dough here, I'm going to hold up the bowl. You can see that we've had a great rise. You can actually see, if we can get a little close up here, the bubbles that are on the sides and bottom of the dough. We've got a little bit of a domed top, meaning that the dough kind of turns in towards the bowl, and those are all good signs that bulk fermentation, the resting stage, is done, and we're ready to shape. Now we're going to shape this dough in 2 stages. We're going to do a pre-shape, and then we're going to let the dough sit and rest for 20 minutes, and then we're going to do our final shape. So I'm going to start with the pre-shaping right now. First thing I'm going to do is get my hands wet, because remember, wet hands are non-stick hands. I'm going to be using my dough scraper here, and I'm also going to get that wet. And let's turn our dough out onto our work surface. And then the purpose of the pre-shape is just to organize the dough into a round. So I'm actually going to flip my dough scraper over, so I'm using the flat edge, get it wet, and I'm gonna just push the dough into itself, holding my dough scraper at an angle. Now, if you don't have one of these, that's okay. You can also use your hand and use the pinky of your hand to push the dough under in a motion just like this. Let me clear that out of the way. So you can use your pinky to push the dough underneath itself. So I'm going to use my dough scraper. I'm going to push the dough under and use my other hand as a guide. And I'm just going to go around and get all 4 sides of this dough. And now what I'm going to do is do the same motion, but I'm going to do it in a counterclockwise motion using this hand as a guide. So watch how I do that. So I'm pushing and turning my dough in a counterclockwise motion. And you'll see that I'm tightening up the surface of the dough just a little bit, and I'm organizing my dough into a round. Now, you can overdo this and actually start to tear the surface of your dough, and you don't want to do that. So once you have it in a round, just go ahead and stop. And then we're going to let this sit on the counter uncovered. We want this to be uncovered because we want a slight skin to form on the surface of the dough. That'll be helpful for later when we're doing our final shaping. So we're done with the pre-shaping, and we're just going to let this dough sit for about 20 minutes. Our dough has been sitting for about 20 minutes after the pre-shape, and now we're ready to move on to the final shape. Now, you can see when I touch this dough, it's not sticky at all, and that's because while it was sitting here, it's got a light film on the surface of the dough, which is going to help to make it non-stick. But the first thing that we're going to do is take our proofing basket and we're going to dust a little bit of flour in it. This is so that the dough doesn't stick to the basket, and that's a really big deal. Your dough will be ruined if you try to get it out and it's stuck. So definitely make sure you do that. If you don't have a proofing basket, just use a mixing bowl lined with a dish towel or a tea towel, and make sure that you liberally flour it. Okay, I'm going to start by taking my dough, and I'm actually going to flip the dough over so that the surface is now on the bottom. There we go. And then I'm going to stretch my dough out just a little bit. Now you can see it's not sticking to my work surface. I'm gonna stretch my dough out just a little bit, and now I'm gonna show you my super easy, no fail shaping method. It works every time and results in beautiful bread. Now, the shaping aspect of sourdough is important because it's what's gonna give your dough structure while it's in the oven baking. If you want to get a nice tall loaf of sourdough bread, you have to make sure that you shape it properly. So I've got my dough stretched out just a little bit. I'm going to take the bottom of my dough, I'm going to grab it and I'm going to pull it up about 1/3 of the way, just like if I was folding a letter. And then I'm going to take the top and do the same thing. I'm going to take the top third and fold it right on over. Give it a little pat, and it's just like I was folding a letter. Then I'm going to turn my dough, and I'm just going to roll it up. And I'm not pushing really hard because we built up all the air in this dough during our resting or bulk fermentation period, and we don't want to degas it and pop all those bubbles in there. So I've rolled my dough up, here it is, and now you have two options. You can leave your dough in this shape. This is called a batard, which is an oval shape. It's a very traditional shape for a loaf of sourdough bread. Or you can slightly round out your dough if you want to make a boule, which is just a round loaf of sourdough. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to round this out so that you have a boule instead of a batard. So here I've rolled up my dough, and now I'm just going to take my hand and I'm going to use my pinky and push under and rotate my dough slightly. Now I'm being gentle here, but I'm rotating my dough slightly, and you can see that now my dough is in a nice round. So this is a boule. And then you're just gonna take your proofing basket, take your dough, I'm gonna flip it over, and I'm gonna put it seam side up in my basket, okay? And that is all you need to do. Now you have done your final shaping on your dough. We're gonna cover this and put it in the refrigerator for the chilling step. Step 5 is chilling. Chilling is an easy but important part of the sourdough process. Cover your proofing basket and place it in the fridge. That's it. This is the cold proof and is where all that amazing sourdough flavor is created, so don't skip it. It's also the easiest part of the entire process and will help you fit sourdough into your schedule. Want warm, fresh bread with dinner? Easy. Refrigerate your loaf until an hour or so before dinner and then bake it. I like to let my dough cold ferment for 12 to 24 hours. Into the fridge you go. All right, you've made it to the last step, baking, everybody's favorite step. Now, take it straight out of the refrigerator. Don't let it sit on the counter and come to room temperature. We want it to be cold for this next part of the process. So I have my dough, it's in my proofing basket. I'm gonna take a piece of parchment paper and put that right over the top of my dough. And then I'm just gonna turn my proofing basket over, and there is my sourdough. Now we're gonna score this bread before we bake it. It's important to score your bread because this gives an area for the steam to escape. If you don't score your bread as it's baking, all of that water that's in the dough is gonna be creating steam and it needs to escape and it'll just tear your bread. So it is important to score your bread. I'm gonna do one expansion score. This is just gonna be one long score from the top of the loaf to the bottom. I have my really sharp bread loam here. You can also do this with just a razor blade or a really sharp knife, or if you didn't have either one of those, you could actually use scissors and just cut the dough a little bit, but a bread loam is really the way to go. Just make sure it's nice and sharp. Now, here's the key with scoring your dough. You need to go in and be quick and confident. You don't want to come in and go slow and saw your dough. We want to do one long slash with our blade, and we're going to hold our blade at a slight angle. We're going to use the tip of the blade and go from top to bottom. Now, I'm going to score this a little bit less than a 1/2 inch deep, okay? So it's maybe a little bit deeper on the scoring than you think, but that's how we do it, all right? Here we go. I'm going to start at the top, score all the way to the bottom, holding my blade at a slight angle. There you go. That is it. I have now done my expansion score, and you can actually see, we'll get in close here, you can see how deep I've gone. I've scored the surface of the dough, and you can see a little bit of that gluten structure that we've built up in our dough. Okay, the next thing is that we're going to immediately place this into our preheated and very hot Dutch oven. You don't want to wait too long. So I'm going to put on my oven mitts and I'm going to grab my Dutch oven. It's very hot, so you want to make sure that you're careful when you do this. I'll be right back. Okay, I've got my really hot Dutch oven here. I'm going to take the lid off, and then I am going to very carefully place my dough inside my Dutch oven. Now I'm going to use the parchment paper to do this. There we go. And again, that is hot, so be careful. And then we're going to put the lid on and we're going to bake this at 450 degrees for 20 minutes with the lid on. And then we're going to take the lid off and keep baking for about another 20 minutes until the internal temperature of the bread is 205 to 210 degrees Fahrenheit. So let me go and pop this in the oven. All right, our bread's been in the oven for 40 minutes. Let's take a look and see how it looks. Look at that. Now you know how to make beautiful sourdough bread using just flour, water, and salt. You don't need to be perfect to bake good bread. You just need someone who's been in your shoes and can show you the way. That's what I'm here for. If this video helped clear things up for you, hit that like button and subscribe. I've got more videos coming that'll walk you through every part of the sourdough process in a way that finally makes sense. You've got this. I'm cheering you on, and I'll see you in the next video.